The woman who stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Stillwater, Oklahoma, that sweltering August afternoon in 1883, carried nothing but a worn carpetbag and secrets too heavy for her slender shoulders to bear. She steadied herself against the coach wheel as the driver tossed down her bag, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar street with a mixture of wariness and desperation that would have been obvious to anyone paying close attention. The cowboy leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon was paying very close attention indeed. Reed Lawson had been waiting for the stage, though not for anyone in particular. He had a habit of watching arrivals in Stillwater, a town small enough that newcomers were either running from something or looking for something, and Reed had long since learned to spot the difference. This woman, with her faded blue traveling dress and the way her hand gripped that carpetbag like it contained her entire world, was running. He could see it in the tension of her jaw, the darting quality of her gaze, the way she flinched when the stage driver spoke too loudly. She was pretty in a way that would make men look twice, with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and features that spoke of intelligence and determination. But it was her eyes that caught Reed's attention most, green as spring grass and holding shadows that seemed far too old for someone who could not have been more than 23 or 24 years. Those eyes swept across the street, past the general store and the sheriff's office, past the saloon and the livery stable, finally landing on Reed himself for just a heartbeat before moving on. Reed pushed off from the hitching post, his tall frame unfolding with the easy grace of someone who spent most of his life on horseback. He was 26, with sun-weathered skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting, wearing the typical garb of a working cowboy. Worn denim pants, a faded shirt, dusty boots with spurs that jingled softly as he walked, and a hat that had seen better days. He was not sure why he felt compelled to approach this particular stranger, only that something in those haunted green eyes called to something in him. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat as he approached, "you look like you could use some direction. New to Stillwater." She turned to face him fully, and up close he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the dust on her dress that spoke of days of travel. "I am," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I am looking for respectable lodging and perhaps work. Do you know of any establishments that might suit? Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house 2 streets over," Reed said, gesturing in that direction. "Clean rooms, good food, reasonable rates. As for work, what kind are you seeking?" "I can read and write well," she said. "I have experience keeping accounts, teaching children, sewing. Whatever honest work is available." Reed noticed she had not given her name, and something about that omission felt significant. "I am Reed Lawson," he offered. "I work at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside town. Been in Stillwater about 4 years now." She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and in that pause Reed saw calculation, decision, commitment. "My name is Smith," she said. "Victoria Smith." It was a lie. Reed knew it as surely as he knew the sun would set in a few hours. Smith was the name people gave when they did not want to give their real one. Too common to trace, too ordinary to question. But he also saw the plea in those green eyes, the silent request not to challenge her on it, and something in him responded to that vulnerability. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Smith," he said, not missing the slight relief that crossed her features when he accepted the name without question. "Let me help you with that bag and show you to Mrs. Henderson's. It is a bit of a walk in this heat." She looked like she wanted to refuse, that stubborn set to her chin suggesting she was used to managing on her own, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. That is kind of you." As they walked down the dusty main street of Stillwater, Reed found himself acutely aware of the woman beside him. She walked with her spine straight despite obvious fatigue, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as if memorizing every detail or watching for threats. When they passed a group of rough-looking men outside the saloon, she moved fractionally closer to Reed, though whether consciously or not he could not tell. "Stillwater is a decent town," Reed said, keeping his voice conversational. "We have got good people here for the most part. Sheriff Coleman keeps things peaceful. The cattle business is the main trade, but we have got farms too, and the railroad comes through twice a week." "It seems quiet," Victoria said, and there was something wistful in her tone. "Quiet can be good," Reed said carefully. "Some folks appreciate that about this place." She glanced at him then, and he saw understanding in her eyes. She knew he was telling her that Stillwater could be a safe haven, that people here did not ask too many questions if you kept to yourself and caused no trouble. "Yes," she said softly. "Quiet can be very good." Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows that somehow managed to bloom despite the Oklahoma heat. Mrs. Henderson herself was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Reed had always appreciated. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Victoria Smith," Reed said as the landlady opened the door to his knock. "She just arrived on the stage and is looking for lodging." Mrs. Henderson looked Victoria over with the assessing eye of someone who had seen plenty of the world's troubles and learned not to judge too harshly. "You look worn out, dear. Come in, come in. I have a nice room on the second floor, faces east so it catches the morning breeze. Board includes breakfast and supper, and there is a bathhouse out back. $3 a week, paid in advance." Victoria reached into a pocket in her dress and produced a small leather purse. Reed could tell by the flat look of it that funds were limited. She counted out coins carefully. "I can pay for 2 weeks now," she said, "but I will need to find employment quickly." "Can you cook?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "Yes, madam, quite well, actually." "So, yes, madam, I can do fine needlework as well as practical mending." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Well then, we might work something out. My eyes are not what they used to be for fine work, and I often have mending that needs doing from my boarders. You help me out with that and some of the cooking, and we can reduce your rate. Say, $2 a week with labor." The relief on Victoria's face was palpable. "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. Good. Now let me show you to your room. Mr. Lawson, thank you for bringing Miss Smith by." Reed touched his hat brim again. "My pleasure, madam." He turned to Victoria. "If you need anything else, Miss Smith, or if you have questions about the town, you can usually find me at the livery stable or at the Triple Bar Ranch. We come into town most Saturdays for supplies." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," Victoria said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice now. "You have been very kind to a stranger." "Welcome to Stillwater," Reed said, and then, because he could not quite help himself, he added, "I hope you find what you are looking for here." Something flickered in her eyes, gratitude mixed with pain, and she nodded once before following Mrs. Henderson inside. Reed stood on the porch for a moment after the door closed, trying to understand why this woman had affected him so strongly. He had seen plenty of people pass through Stillwater over the years, had even helped a few get settled, but none had sparked this particular protective instinct in him. There was something about Victoria Smith that called to him, something beyond her obvious beauty or her equally obvious troubles. The boy who came running around the corner of the boarding house nearly crashed into Reed as he descended the porch steps. The child could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with shaggy dark blonde hair and enormous blue eyes that widened in alarm at the near collision. "Sorry, mister," the boy gasped, backing up quickly. Reed steadied the child with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No harm done, son. Where are you rushing off to?" Delivering a message to Mrs. Henderson, the boy said, holding up a folded piece of paper. "From Doc Brennan." "Well, do not let me keep you then," Reed said, stepping aside. The boy darted past him and up the porch steps, knocking on the door with the persistence of youth. As Reed walked back toward the main street, he found his thoughts returning to Victoria Smith and those haunted green eyes. He had a feeling that whatever had brought her to Stillwater was far from finished with her. And for reasons he did not entirely understand, he felt invested in making sure she came through it safely. The Triple Bar Ranch where Reed worked was a sprawling operation run by a man named Henry Garrett, who treated his hands fairly and ran his cattle business with integrity. Reed had been working there for 4 years, ever since he had drifted into Oklahoma territory from Texas, looking for a fresh start of his own. He was good with horses, better than most, and had worked his way up to being Henry's top wrangler. It was steady work, honest work, and it had given Reed something he had not had in a long time, a sense of belonging. That evening, as Reed sat around the bunkhouse table with the other ranch hands playing cards, he found his mind wandering back to the woman from the stagecoach. His distraction must have been obvious because Tom Miller, one of the older cowboys, called him out on it. "You going to play that card or just stare at it all night, Reed?" Tom asked with a grin. Reed threw down the card with a sheepish smile. "Sorry, got a lot on my mind." "I heard you were in town when the stage came in," said another hand, Jake Peterson. "Pretty woman got off, they say. Auburn hair, traveling alone." "You heard right," Reed said, keeping his voice neutral. "She got a name," Jake pressed. "Smith, Victoria Smith." Tom snorted. "Smith, huh? That is about as likely as me being the King of England." "Maybe she has got reasons for keeping her business private," Reed said, an edge to his voice that made Tom raise his eyebrows. "Easy there, Reed. No offense meant, just making an observation." Reed forced himself to relax. "None taken. I just figure everyone deserves a chance to start fresh if they need to." "That is true enough," Tom agreed. "Lord knows plenty of us out here are running from something or someone. That is what the West is for, right? New beginnings." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Reed remained distracted for the rest of the evening. When he finally turned in, lying on his bunk and listening to the night sounds through the open bunkhouse windows, he found himself wondering what Victoria Smith was running from. An abusive husband, family troubles, the law. Somehow the last option did not feel right. Whatever she was fleeing, Reed felt certain it was not justice but injustice that had set her on the road, in her small room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Victoria stood at the window looking out at the darkening Oklahoma sky. She had unpacked her few belongings, washed the travel dust from her face and hands in the basin provided, and changed into a clean dress. Now she stood in the gathering darkness and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to breathe. She had made it. After weeks of careful planning, after stealing away in the dead of night, after constantly looking over her shoulder and jumping at every shadow, she had finally put enough distance between herself and Boston to feel like she might actually be safe. Stillwater, Oklahoma was about as far from Beacon Hill as a person could get, in every sense that mattered. Victoria Margaret Morrison, daughter of the late Charles Morrison and stepdaughter of the very much alive and utterly monstrous Frederick Whitmore, was dead as far as Boston society was concerned. She had made sure of that, spreading enough rumors and leaving enough carefully crafted evidence to suggest she had drowned herself in the Charles River, unable to bear the grief of her mother's sudden death 3 months prior. The story would shock polite society, generate gossip for a few weeks, and then fade away. Her stepfather would play the part of the grieving guardian, would make all the appropriate gestures of sorrow, and would breathe a sigh of relief that the stepdaughter who had discovered his embezzlement and fraud was permanently silenced. Except she was not silenced. She was here, in Stillwater, Oklahoma, alive and determined to build a new life where Frederick Whitmore's reach could not extend. She had taken with her only what she could carry, including the carefully copied documents that proved Frederick's crimes, hidden in the false bottom of her carpetbag. Insurance, in case he ever found her. Evidence that would ruin him if he tried to drag her back. Victoria pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the day's retained heat. She thought of the cowboy who had helped her this afternoon, Reed Lawson, with his steady brown eyes and quiet kindness. He had known she was lying about her name, she was certain of it, but he had not challenged her. There had been something reassuring about his presence, something solid and trustworthy that she had not felt around a man since her father died 5 years ago. She could not afford to trust anyone, Victoria reminded herself firmly. She could not afford attachments or complications. She needed to keep her head down, earn her keep, and disappear into the anonymity of this small Oklahoma town. No matter how kind Reed Lawson's eyes had been, no matter how safe she had felt walking beside him through the dusty streets, she could not let herself depend on anyone but herself. Still, as she finally climbed into bed that night, exhausted beyond measure, Victoria's last waking thought was of those steady brown eyes and the way Reed had said, "I hope you find what you are looking for here," as if he genuinely meant it. The next morning, Victoria woke to golden sunlight streaming through her east-facing window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she panicked, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and with it a cautious sense of relief. She was in Stillwater. She was safe, at least for now. She dressed quickly in a simple gray cotton dress, pinned her hair up in a practical style, and made her way downstairs. The dining room held a long table where 5 other boarders were already seated, eating breakfast and conversing in low tones. They looked up as she entered, offering nods and murmured greetings. Mrs. Henderson bustled in from the kitchen carrying a platter of eggs. "Good morning, Miss Smith. I hope you slept well. Come, sit, eat. You look like you need a good meal or 3. Victoria found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I slept very well, actually." She was introduced to her fellow boarders. Mr. Franklin, an elderly gentleman who worked as a clerk at the general store. Miss Abigail Carter, a school teacher in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Mr. and Mrs. Douglas, a middle-aged couple who ran a small farm just outside town, and Samuel Green, a young man who worked at the bank. All were polite, none were overly curious, and Victoria felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. After breakfast, Mrs. Henderson showed Victoria the mending that needed attention. There was a substantial pile, torn shirts, pants with holes in the knees, a dress with a ripped hem. Victoria settled herself in a chair on the front porch where the light was good and set to work. She had always been skilled with a needle, one of the few traditionally feminine accomplishments her mother had successfully imparted, and she found the familiar rhythm of stitching soothing. She had been working for perhaps an hour when Miss Carter came out onto the porch, dressed for the day with a satchel of books over her shoulder. "You have a very neat hand with that needle," Miss Carter observed. "Mrs. Henderson is lucky to have found you." "Thank you," Victoria said. "I find it peaceful work." Miss Carter hesitated, then said, "I know it is not my place, but I wanted to tell you that if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it is like to be a woman making her own way in the world. I am a good listener." Victoria looked up, meeting the schoolteacher's kind eyes. She saw understanding there and recognition. Miss Carter was a woman alone in the world too, earning her own living, subject to the judgments and restrictions that society placed on women without male protection. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "That means more than you might think." Miss Carter smiled. "Stillwater is a good place for fresh starts. I came here 7 years ago from Missouri, and I have never regretted it. Give it time, Miss Smith. You will find your footing." After Miss Carter left for the schoolhouse, Victoria returned to her mending, but the teacher's words stayed with her. A good place for fresh starts. She hoped that was true. The morning passed peacefully. Victoria finished the mending and then helped Mrs. Henderson prepare lunch for the boarders who came home to eat. The work was not glamorous, but it was honest and useful, and Victoria found satisfaction in it. She was just putting away the last of the clean dishes when Mrs. Henderson called her into the parlor. "Miss Smith, I have been thinking," the landlady said. "Miss Carter mentioned that she has been looking for someone to help at the schoolhouse, particularly with the younger children's reading lessons. The school board has not approved funds for an assistant teacher, but Miss Carter thought perhaps you might be interested in volunteering a few hours a week. It would be good for the children, and it might help you get to know more people in town." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse. The more visible she was, the more risk she ran of being noticed, remembered, perhaps eventually traced. But she also knew that isolating herself completely would seem suspicious and strange. She needed to appear to be exactly what she claimed, a respectable single woman seeking honest work and a quiet life. "I think I would like that," Victoria said carefully. "I have always enjoyed working with children." "Wonderful. I will let Miss Carter know you are willing. She will be pleased." That afternoon, Victoria walked to the general store to purchase thread and a few other necessities. The store was a large building at the corner of Main Street, its windows displaying everything from farm implements to ladies' hats. Inside, the space was crowded with goods: barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, bolts of fabric, hardware, medicines, and 1,000 other items. Mr. Franklin, the elderly clerk who boarded at Mrs. Henderson's, greeted her warmly. "Miss Smith, what can I help you find today?" Victoria gave him her short list, and he gathered the items efficiently. As he was wrapping them, the bell over the door jangled and a group of men entered, their voices loud and their demeanor aggressive. Victoria recognized the type immediately: men who were used to taking what they wanted and pushing others around. In Boston, they wore fine suits and wielded social power. Here they wore rough clothes and gun belts, but the essential character was the same. "Franklin, I need to settle my account," one of them called out, a big man with a florid face and mean eyes. "Of course, Mr. Hackett," Mr. Franklin said, his voice suddenly tense. "Let me just finish helping Miss Smith here." "The lady can wait," Hackett said dismissively, not even glancing at Victoria. "I do not have all day." Victoria saw Mr. Franklin's distress and felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. She had spent too much of her life watching powerful men dismiss and belittle others. "Actually," she said clearly, "Mr. Franklin was here first helping me. I am sure you can wait a few moments, Mr. Hackett." Hackett finally looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "And who might you be?" "A customer who was here before you," Victoria said, keeping her voice level despite the way her heart was racing. For a moment the store was utterly silent. Then Hackett laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You have got some nerve, lady. You must be new around here, or you would know better than to talk to me like that." "Leave her alone, Hackett," Mr. Franklin said, his voice shaking slightly. "She did not mean anything by it." I meant exactly what I said, Victoria corrected, lifting her chin. Courtesy costs nothing and rudeness serves no one. One of Hackett's companions snickered, earning himself a vicious glare from his boss. Hackett took a step toward Victoria, and she held her ground despite every instinct screaming at her to run. She had run far enough. She would not be intimidated, not anymore. "You need to learn your place," Hackett said, his voice low and threatening. The bell over the door jangled again, and a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Victoria felt relief wash over her as Reed Lawson stepped into the store, his hand resting casually on his hip near where he wore his gun belt. He looked relaxed, but there was steel in his eyes as he took in the scene. "No problem, Lawson," Hackett said. "Just having a conversation with the new lady." "Looked more like intimidation to me," Reed said mildly. "Miss Smith, are you all right?" "I am fine, Mr. Lawson, thank you," Victoria said, grateful that her voice remained steady. Reed nodded, then looked at Hackett. "I think you should settle your account and be on your way, Hackett. And maybe remember that threatening women in broad daylight in town tends to upset Sheriff Coleman." Hackett's face darkened, but after a tense moment he turned to Mr. Franklin. "The account, Franklin. Now." The transaction was completed in silence, and then Hackett and his men left, though not before Hackett shot Victoria a look that promised the matter was not finished. When they were gone, Mr. Franklin sagged against the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And Miss Smith, you should not have confronted him like that. Cyrus Hackett owns the biggest ranch in the county, and he is not a man to cross." "I am sorry if I caused trouble," Victoria said, though she was not entirely sorry. "But I will not stand by and watch bullies push people around." Reed looked at her with something like admiration in his eyes. "That is a fine sentiment, Miss Smith, but Mr. Franklin is right that you need to be careful. Hackett has a mean streak a mile wide, and he is not used to being challenged, especially not by women." "I will keep that in mind," Victoria said, taking her wrapped purchases from Mr. Franklin. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Lawson." "Let me walk you back to Mrs. Henderson's," Reed said. It was not really a question. They walked in silence for a few moments before Reed spoke. "You have got courage, I will give you that. But courage without caution can get you into serious trouble out here." "I have had enough of being cautious and quiet while bad men do as they please," Victoria said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Reed glanced at her, and she saw understanding in his expression. "Is that what you are running from? A bad man?" Victoria's first instinct was to deny everything, but something about Reed's gentle tone and the genuine concern in his eyes made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "Yes," she said quietly. "Though he would appear to most of the world as a very good man, respectable, wealthy, connected. But you know different, I know different." They had reached the boarding house. Reed stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at her seriously. "Miss Smith, whatever name you want to go by is fine with me. Whatever you are running from is your business. But I want you to know that if you need help, if you need someone to stand with you, you can count on me." Victoria felt something crack in the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. This man, this cowboy who barely knew her, was offering protection without asking for anything in return. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Reed was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You know how sometimes you look at a person and just know they are worth fighting for? I cannot explain it better than that. From the moment I saw you step off that stage, looking so brave and so scared at the same time, I felt like I needed to make sure you were all right. Maybe that sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish," Victoria said, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "It sounds like the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." Reed's smile was warm and genuine. "Then I am glad I said it. Now get inside before Mrs. Henderson worries. And Miss Smith, try to avoid any more confrontations with Hackett if you can. I mean that." "I will do my best," Victoria promised, though they both knew she would not back down if confronted again. As Victoria climbed the porch steps, she looked back once to see Reed still standing there, watching to make sure she got safely inside. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he touched his hat brim before turning to walk back toward the livery stable. Inside, Victoria leaned against the closed door and closed her eyes. She was in trouble, she knew. Not just because she had made an enemy of Cyrus Hackett, though that was certainly a problem. No, she was in trouble because Reed Lawson, with his steady eyes and quiet strength, was making her want things she could not afford to want, making her feel safe when she knew safety was an illusion, making her hope when hope was dangerous. But even knowing all that, Victoria could not quite suppress the warmth that bloomed in her chest when she thought of the way Reed had looked at her, or the promise he had made to stand with her if she needed him. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria fell into a routine that was both comforting and strange in its ordinariness. She helped Mrs. Henderson with cooking and mending, began spending mornings at the schoolhouse, helping Miss Carter with the younger students, and slowly got to know the rhythms and people of Stillwater. She learned which shopkeepers were fair and which tried to cheat newcomers, which families were welcoming and which were suspicious of outsiders, which parts of town were safe and which were best avoided after dark. She also saw Reed Lawson far more often than coincidence could account for. He always seemed to be in town when she was running errands, always happened to be passing by when she walked to or from the schoolhouse, always found a reason to stop and talk for a few minutes. Victoria knew she should discourage his attention, knew that getting close to anyone was dangerous, but she found herself looking forward to those encounters more than she wanted to admit. Reed was easy to talk to, she discovered. He had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh, a thoughtfulness that suggested he paid attention to the world around him, and a kindness that seemed utterly genuine. He told her about the Triple Bar Ranch, about the horses he trained, about the other ranch hands who had become something like family to him. He asked her about her day, about the children she worked with at school, about her impressions of Stillwater, but he never pressed for information about her past. For her part, Victoria found herself sharing more than she intended. She talked about the books she loved, about her passion for teaching, about the satisfaction she found in making beautiful things with needle and thread. She carefully edited her stories to remove any identifying details, but the emotions were real, and Reed seemed to understand that what she was sharing was as much truth as she could safely offer. They were becoming friends, Victoria realized one afternoon as they walked together from the general store back to the boarding house. True friends, despite the secrets between them. Or perhaps because of them, because Reed seemed to understand that some secrets were necessary and did not hold them against her. "There is a dance this Saturday at the community hall," Reed said as they walked. "The whole town turns out for it. Music, food, good company. Would you consider letting me escort you?" Victoria's heart jumped at the invitation, equal parts excitement and fear. A dance meant visibility, meant being seen with Reed in a context that suggested courtship, meant stepping further into a life she was not sure she had the right to claim. But it also sounded wonderful, a chance to be normal for an evening, to dance and laugh and pretend she was just an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "Thank you for asking." Reed's smile was brilliant. "I will pick you up at 7 then. Fair warning, I am a decent dancer but not fancy. We keep things pretty simple out here." Simple sounds perfect, Victoria said and meant it. The rest of the week passed in a haze of anticipation and anxiety. Victoria had not been to a dance since before her mother died, and never with someone she actually wanted to spend time with. The young men of her Boston social circle had been polished and educated and utterly boring, more concerned with her inheritance and social connections than with her as a person. Reed was different. Reed saw her, really saw her, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Mrs. Henderson, who missed nothing, noticed Victoria's nervous energy. "That cowboy has made quite an impression on you," she observed one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Lawson has been very kind. Reed Lawson is a good man, Mrs. Henderson said. "One of the best I have known. Honest, hard-working, decent. You could do far worse, my dear." "I am not looking for romance," Victoria said, a bit too quickly. Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing look. "Maybe not. But sometimes romance finds us anyway, whether we are looking for it or not." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures that would cool pleasantly by evening. Victoria spent far too long getting ready, trying on the 3 dresses she owned before settling on a dark green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair in a softer style than usual, allowing a few curls to frame her face, and allowed herself a tiny bit of color on her lips and cheeks. When Reed arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, the look on his face told her the effort had been worth it. He wore clean denim pants, polished boots, a white shirt, and a leather vest with his dark hair neatly combed and his hat in his hands. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Victoria felt her heart flutter. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They walked to the community hall as the sun was beginning its descent, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and rose. Other couples and families were making their way to the same destination, calling out greetings as they passed. Victoria felt a strange sense of belonging, as if she really was just another resident of Stillwater heading out for an evening of entertainment. The community hall was a large wooden building that served multiple purposes: church services on Sundays, town meetings when needed, and social events like tonight's dance. By the time Reed and Victoria arrived, the space was already half full with people. A group of musicians was setting up in one corner: a fiddler, a man with a guitar, another with a harmonica, and someone preparing to play what looked like a washboard bass. "Reed," someone called, and Victoria turned to see a man in his 50s approaching with a smile. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors and the confident bearing of authority. "Henry," Reed said warmly. "Good to see you. Miss Smith, this is Henry Garrett, owner of the Triple Bar Ranch. Henry, this is Victoria Smith." Henry shook her hand with a firm grip. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Smith. Red has mentioned you a time or two." "Has he?" Victoria asked, glancing at Reed with a raised eyebrow. Reed had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Henry, do not make trouble." Henry laughed. "I am just saying, it is nice to see Reed taking an interest in something besides horses for a change. Enjoy the dance, you two." As Henry walked away, Reed offered Victoria his arm. "Sorry about that. Henry means well, but he has no sense of subtlety." "I do not mind," Victoria said, taking his arm. The contact sent a pleasant warmth through her. "It is nice to know you talk about me." "Hard not to," Reed said honestly. "You are about the most interesting thing to happen in Stillwater in a long time." Before Victoria could respond, the music started, a lively tune that had people flooding onto the dance floor. Reed led her out among them, and they fell into the simple patterns of a reel. He had understated his dancing ability, Victoria discovered. He moved with the same easy grace he brought to everything else, leading her confidently through the steps. They danced several dances, pausing between sets to cool off and sample the refreshments that local families had contributed. Victoria met more townspeople than she could possibly remember. Farmers and shopkeepers, ranch hands and housewives, children running wild in the way that children at parties always did. Everyone was friendly, and if anyone thought it odd that the new woman in town had arrived on Reed Lawson's arm, they kept it to themselves. Victoria was talking with Miss Carter and a few other women when she became aware of a commotion near the door. She turned to see Cyrus Hackett entering with several of his men, and her stomach tightened with apprehension. She had managed to avoid him since their confrontation at the general store, but she had known the reprieve would not last forever. Hackett's eyes scanned the room and landed on her almost immediately. He said something to his companions and began making his way across the hall in her direction. Victoria saw Reed notice and move toward her from where he had been talking with Henry Garrett. "Miss Smith," Hackett said as he reached her, his tone exaggeratedly polite. "I believe you owe me a dance. We got off on the wrong foot at Franklin's store and I would like to make amends." It was phrased as a request, but there was challenge in his eyes and in the way his men had positioned themselves around the little group. Victoria was acutely aware of everyone watching, of the sudden tension in the room. To refuse publicly would be an insult, would escalate the conflict. But to accept felt like a betrayal of herself, and everything she believed about not letting bullies have their way. Before she could respond, Reed was at her side. "I am afraid Miss Smith's dance card is full for the evening, Hackett. Perhaps another time." "I was not asking you, Lawson," Hackett said, his voice hardening. "And I was not asking your permission," Reed replied evenly. "The lady is here with me, and I do not intend to share her company." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Victoria could see Hackett's men shifting, hands moving closer to weapons. She saw Reed's stance change subtly, preparing for trouble. And she knew with sudden clarity that she could not let this situation explode into violence, not here, not at a community dance with children present, not over her. "Gentlemen," she said firmly, stepping between Reed and Hackett, "there is no need for conflict. Mr. Hackett, I appreciate your invitation, but as Mr. Lawson said, I am here with him this evening. Perhaps we can all simply enjoy the dance without drama." Hackett stared at her, anger and something else, something calculating in his eyes. Then he smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "Of course, Miss Smith, no drama, but you should know that in Stillwater, people who cross me tend to regret it. You and your cowboy friend might want to remember that." He turned and walked away, his men following. The normal noise of the dance resumed gradually, but Victoria could feel the curious and concerned looks directed at her and Reed. "We should probably go," Reed said quietly. "Before this gets worse." Victoria nodded, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. They made their goodbyes to Mrs. Henderson and Miss Carter, collected Victoria's shawl and stepped out into the night. The air had cooled pleasantly, and the sky was brilliant with stars. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Reed spoke. "I am sorry. I should not have let my temper get the better of me. I just could not stand the thought of him putting his hands on you, even in a dance." "You do not need to apologize," Victoria said, "and I appreciate your defense of me. But Reed, I do not want you getting hurt because of me. Hackett seems like a dangerous man." "He is," Reed agreed. "He came out here about 5 years ago with money from back east, bought up a lot of land, and has been throwing his weight around ever since. He is not used to being told no, and he holds grudges. I will keep an eye out, and you should be careful." They had reached the boarding house. Victoria turned to face Reed in the moonlight. "Thank you for a lovely evening, at least until the end." I had forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy myself. We will have to do it again soon then, Reed said. Maybe without the confrontation this time. Victoria laughed softly. That would be nice. There was a moment of awareness between them, standing close together in the shadows of the porch, and Victoria found herself wondering if Reed would kiss her. Part of her desperately wanted him to, wanted to know what it would feel like to be kissed by a man she actually cared about. But a larger part knew it was too soon, too dangerous, too complicated. Reed seemed to be having the same internal debate. He reached out and gently tucked a loose curl behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Good night, Victoria," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Good night, Reed," she whispered back. She watched him walk away into the darkness before going inside, her emotions in turmoil. She was falling for him, she realized. Despite all her resolutions to stay detached, despite knowing how dangerous it was to let anyone close, she was falling for Reed Lawson. And from the way he had looked at her tonight, the gentleness of his touch, she thought he might be falling for her too. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, as she lay in bed that night listening to the quiet sounds of the sleeping house, Victoria found herself smiling. The next week brought changes both welcome and troubling. Welcome was the deepening connection between Victoria and Reed. He had taken to coming into town almost every day, always finding some excuse, always spending time with her. They took walks around Stillwater, talking about everything and nothing. They shared lunches that Victoria packed from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, sitting under the cottonwood trees by the creek that ran through town. They discovered shared interests, a love of books, though Reed's reading was limited by education and opportunity, a fascination with the natural world, a dry sense of humor that made their conversations sparkle with laughter. Victoria told him more about herself, carefully edited stories that contained emotional truth, even if the facts were altered. She talked about losing her father, though she did not mention that Charles Morrison had been a wealthy Boston businessman. She talked about her difficult relationship with her mother, though she did not explain that her mother had remarried a monster or that she herself had fled for her life. She talked about the suffocating expectations of the world she came from, the pressure to be ornamental rather than useful, and Reed listened with an understanding that suggested he knew something about not fitting the mold others expected. For his part, Reed shared his own history. He told her about growing up on a small farm in East Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. He talked about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about drifting west working on various ranches, about the loneliness of a life always moving from place to place. He talked about finding Henry Garrett and the Triple Bar Ranch, about finally having something that felt like home, about the satisfaction of working with horses, and seeing them respond to patient, gentle training. "They are not so different from people, really," Reed said one afternoon as they sat by the creek. "Horses, I mean. They respond to kindness and consistency. They learn to trust if you show them they can, and once you have their trust, they will do anything for you." "Is that your philosophy with people too?" Victoria asked, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "I suppose it is," Reed said thoughtfully. "Though people are harder to read than horses sometimes, horses do not lie about what they are feeling." Victoria felt a pang of guilt at his words, thinking of all the lies she was telling, all the truths she was withholding. What if someone had good reasons for not being entirely honest, she asked carefully. What if the truth was dangerous? Reed looked at her, and his eyes were gentle. Then I would trust that they would tell me what I needed to know when they needed to tell me. And I would wait, because some things are worth waiting for. The troubling change came in the form of increased attention from Cyrus Hackett. He seemed determined to make Victoria's life difficult, though he was clever enough not to do anything overtly threatening. He spread rumors about her in town, suggesting she was not respectable, hinting that a woman traveling alone must be running from shame of some kind. He made a point of being wherever she was, watching her with those calculating eyes, making sure she knew he had not forgotten or forgiven her public refusal of him. Worse, he began targeting Reed as well. He approached Henry Garrett about buying the Triple Bar Ranch, making it clear that if Henry refused, he would make life difficult for him and his operation. He complained to Sheriff Coleman that Reed's horses had damaged his property, a lie that Coleman saw through but had to investigate anyway. He made sure Reed knew that his interest in Victoria was noted and would have consequences. "He is trying to isolate you," Miss Carter observed one morning at the schoolhouse. "Making sure you have no friends, no allies. It is what men like Hackett do when they want to control someone." "I will not be controlled," Victoria said firmly. "Not by him, not by anyone." "I believe you," Miss Carter said, "but be careful, Victoria. Men like Hackett are dangerous when they do not get what they want." The warning proved prescient. A few days later, Victoria was walking back from the schoolhouse in the late afternoon when a rider came up beside her. It was one of Hackett's men, a lean man with cold eyes who had been at the dance. "Mr. Hackett would like a word with you, Miss Smith," he said. "Private-like." "He is waiting at the hotel." "Tell Mr. Hackett I have nothing to say to him," Victoria replied, continuing to walk. The rider moved his horse to block her path. He was not asking, Miss Smith. He was telling. Fear spiked through Victoria, but she kept her voice level. "And I am telling you to get out of my way. I am not going anywhere with you or Hackett." "Then maybe your cowboy friend needs to hear about what you are really running from," the man said, and Victoria's blood ran cold. "Mr. Hackett has connections back east. He has been making inquiries. Seems there was a young society woman from Boston who supposedly drowned herself a few months back. Victoria Margaret Morrison, stepdaughter of Frederick Whitmore, a man of considerable wealth and influence. Funny thing is, they never found a body. And the woman in those Boston newspaper sketches, well, she looks an awful lot like you, Miss Smith." Victoria felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Hackett knew. Somehow he had figured out who she was, or at least enough to threaten exposure. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Just a conversation. At the hotel. 30 minutes. If you do not show, Mr. Hackett will make sure everyone in Stillwater knows exactly who you are, and he will send a telegram to Boston letting your stepfather know where you are. I hear Mr. Whitmore is very concerned about you, has offered a reward for information about your whereabouts." The rider turned and rode away, leaving Victoria standing frozen on the dusty street. Her worst fear had come true. She had been found. And now she had to decide. Face Hackett and whatever he wanted or run again. But she was tired of running. And the thought of leaving Stillwater, leaving Reed, made her chest ache in a way she had not expected. Somehow, in just 3 weeks, this place and these people had become important to her. Reed had become important to her, maybe the most important person in her life. With a deep breath, Victoria changed direction and headed for the hotel. The building was one of the nicer structures in Stillwater, 2 stories with a wide veranda. She climbed the steps, pushed through the doors, and found Hackett waiting in the lobby. He smiled when he saw her, and it was a predator's smile. "Miss Smith, or should I say Miss Morrison, please, let us talk in private." He gestured toward a small room off the lobby used for meetings. Victoria followed, every nerve in her body screaming danger. Inside, Hackett closed the door and turned to face her. "You are wondering what I want," he said without preamble. "The answer is simple. You." "Excuse me," Victoria said, though she had a sinking feeling she knew exactly what he meant. I want you as my wife, Hackett said bluntly. You are beautiful, educated, clearly from good breeding despite your current circumstances. You would be an asset to a man of my position. Agree to marry me and I will keep your secrets. Refuse and I will destroy you. I will tell everyone in Stillwater who you really are and why you are hiding. I will contact your stepfather and collect the reward he is offering, and I will make sure Reed Lawson pays for getting in my way. You are insane, Victoria said, her voice shaking with anger more than fear now. I would never marry you, not if you were the last man on earth. Hackett's expression hardened. Then you are a fool. What exactly do you think you have here, Miss Morrison? A make-believe life with a cowboy who cannot even read properly, who will never be anything more than hired help. You were born to wealth and society. With me, you could have that again. I have money, land, power. I could give you a life of comfort. What you call comfort, I call a prison, Victoria said. I left that world behind because men like you and my stepfather think money and power give you the right to control others. I would rather live in poverty as a free woman than in luxury as your possession. Fine words, Hackett sneered, but you will change your mind. You have 3 days to think about my offer. If you have not agreed by then, I will proceed with exposing you. And Miss Morrison, do not even think about running again. I have men watching all the roads out of town. He brushed past her and left the room. Victoria stood there, trembling with rage and fear, trying to think. 3 days. She had 3 days to figure out what to do. Her first thought was to go to Reed to tell him everything. But what could he do? He had no power, no resources to stand against someone like Hackett. And if Hackett carried out his threat to contact Frederick Whitmore, Reed could be in danger too. Frederick had the money and connections to send men after her, men who would not hesitate to remove anyone who got in their way. Victoria walked out of the hotel in a daze. She did not remember the journey back to the boarding house, only found herself standing in her room with no memory of climbing the stairs. She sank onto her bed, her mind racing through possibilities and finding no good options. She could run, but Hackett had men watching, and even if she escaped, she would be leaving Reed behind to face whatever retaliation Hackett devised. She could not bear that thought. She could go to Sheriff Coleman, but what would she tell him? That Hackett had discovered her identity and was blackmailing her into marriage. Hackett had not actually broken any laws. And if she explained why she was hiding, if she told the sheriff about Frederick Whitmore and the embezzlement and fraud, she would be putting her own freedom at risk. She had no proof that Frederick had tried to hurt her, only the documents proving his financial crimes. And those documents implicated her mother's estate in ways that could be twisted to suggest Victoria herself had been involved. She could marry Hackett. The thought made her physically ill, but it would keep everyone safe. Except it would not, would it? Hackett was cruel and controlling. Life with him would be a different kind of prison, possibly worse than what she had fled in Boston. There was a soft knock on her door. "Victoria," Mrs. Henderson's voice. "Dear, are you all right? You looked distressed when you came in." Victoria opened the door to find Mrs. Henderson standing there with Miss Carter beside her. One look at Victoria's face and both women were in the room with the door closed behind them. "What happened?" Miss Carter asked gently, and suddenly Victoria was crying, great wrenching sobs that she could not control. The two women held her, made soothing sounds, and waited for the storm to pass. When she could finally speak, Victoria found herself telling them everything, who she really was, what she was running from, and what Hackett was threatening. When she finished, both women were quiet for a long moment. Then Mrs. Henderson said firmly, "That man is a monster and you will not marry him." "But he will expose me," Victoria said. He will tell Frederick where I am." "Let him," Miss Carter said unexpectedly. "Victoria, you have committed no crime. You have proof that your stepfather has. Perhaps it is time to stop running and start fighting back." "I cannot ask the people of Stillwater to fight my battles," Victoria protested. "You are not asking," Mrs. Henderson said. "We are offering. You have become one of us, dear, and we take care of our own." "But Reed," Victoria whispered. "Hackett will go after Reed." "Then we need to tell Reed what is happening," Miss Carter said. "Right now, tonight. He deserves to know the truth, and he deserves the chance to help you." Victoria wanted to protest, but she knew Miss Carter was right. She had been a coward, hiding behind lies and partial truths. If she and Reed had any chance of a real future, it had to be built on honesty. "Will you come with me?" she asked, and both women nodded. They found Reed at the livery stable, brushing down a horse by lamplight. He looked up as they entered and immediately saw something was wrong. "Victoria, what is it?" "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to tell you the truth about who I am and why I came to Stillwater. And after I do, if you want nothing more to do with me, I will understand." Reed set down the brush and gave her his full attention. "All right, I am listening." So Victoria told him. She told him about growing up as Victoria Morrison in Boston, about her father's death and her mother's remarriage to Frederick Whitmore. She told him about discovering Frederick's embezzlement scheme, about her mother's sudden and suspicious death, about the threats Frederick had made. She told him about faking her own death and fleeing west, about the documents she had hidden away as insurance. And finally, she told him about Hackett's blackmail and his ultimatum. When she finished, Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Why did you not tell me before?" "I was afraid," Victoria admitted. "Afraid you would not want to be involved with a woman with so much trouble attached to her. Afraid I was putting you in danger just by being near you. And I suppose I was afraid you would think less of me for running instead of facing Frederick directly." Reed stepped closer and took both her hands in his. "Victoria, I have known since the day you arrived that you were running from something. I have known your name was not really Smith. None of that changed how I felt about you. And hearing the truth now, knowing what you have survived and how brave you have been, I only care about you more." "But Hackett," Victoria said, "he will come after you. He already has been." "Let him try," Reed said grimly. "I am not going to let him hurt you or force you into anything. We will figure this out together." "How?" Victoria asked. "What can we do against a man like Hackett?" "First, we go to Sheriff Coleman," Reed said. "We tell him everything. Then we contact the federal marshals. What your stepfather did is wire fraud, embezzlement of estate funds, possibly even murder if your mother's death was not natural. That is federal business. Let the law handle Frederick Whitmore." "But that could take months," Mrs. Henderson pointed out. "What do we do about Hackett in the meantime?" "We call his bluff," Miss Carter said. "If Hackett exposes Victoria, he loses his leverage. She is not wanted for any crime. He has nothing to hold over her except the possibility of her stepfather finding her. But if we have already contacted the federal authorities about Frederick's crimes, her stepfather will have bigger problems than chasing Victoria down." Reed nodded. "That could work. But Victoria, you need to make the decision. It is your life, your safety. What do you want to do?" Victoria looked at the three people who had become so dear to her in such a short time. Mrs. Henderson with her motherly concern, Miss Carter with her sharp intelligence, and Reed with his steady strength. She thought about the life she had been building here, the freedom she had found, the love that was growing between her and this cowboy who saw her for who she truly was. "I am tired of running," she said. "I am tired of being afraid. Let us fight back." The meeting with Sheriff Coleman took place that evening in his office. The sheriff was a lean man in his late 40s with intelligent eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened to Victoria's story without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing increasingly serious. When she finished, he sat back in his chair. "Miss Morrison, you have been carrying a heavy burden. I wish you had come to me sooner, but I understand why you did not." He looked at Reed. "And you are willing to vouch for her character?" "Without hesitation," Reed said. "Everything I have seen of Victoria, of her kindness and courage and integrity, tells me she is telling the truth." Coleman nodded. "I believe her too. The question is what to do about it." He tapped his desk thoughtfully. "Federal marshals have jurisdiction over cases like this, but the nearest marshal is in Oklahoma City. It would take days to get him here and more days to build a case against your stepfather. In the meantime, we have the problem of Cyrus Hackett. Can you arrest him for blackmail, Mrs. Henderson asked. "Only if Miss Morrison is willing to testify, and that would require revealing her identity publicly, which defeats the purpose," Coleman said. "But I can have a conversation with Hackett, make it clear that I know what he is up to and that he would be wise to back off." "He will not listen," Victoria said. "He is too arrogant, too certain of his power." "Maybe so," Coleman agreed, "but it might buy you some time. Let me send a telegram to the federal marshal tonight, explain the situation. We can hopefully have someone here within the week to take your statement and start proceedings against Mr. Whitmore. In the meantime, I suggest you stay somewhere safe. Hackett knows where you live at the boarding house." "She can stay at the ranch," Reed said immediately. "Henry has a house on the property with an extra room. Mrs. Garrett would be happy to have company, I am sure, and we have got plenty of men who can keep watch." Victoria wanted to protest, did not want to be more of a burden than she already was, but the relief she felt at the idea of being somewhere safe, somewhere with Reed nearby, was overwhelming. "If you are certain it would not be an imposition," she said. "It is settled then," Coleman said, standing. "I will send that telegram and then pay a visit to Mr. Hackett. You folks get Miss Morrison out to the Triple Bar tonight. Reed, I am counting on you to keep her safe." "You can count on me, Sheriff," Reed said. An hour later, Victoria found herself riding in a wagon next to Reed on the road out to the Triple Bar Ranch. Her few belongings were packed in the back, and the night around them was alive with the sounds of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. The moon was nearly full, bathing the landscape in silver light. "Are you frightened?" Reed asked quietly. "Yes," Victoria admitted, "but not as much as I was. Having you beside me helps." Reed reached over and took her hand. "I am not going anywhere, Victoria. Whatever comes, we will face it together." She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Why are you doing this? You could have walked away when you learned the truth. It would have been safer for you. You remember what I told you that first day?" Reed asked. "That sometimes you look at a person and just know they are worth fighting for. That has not changed. If anything, I am more certain now than I was then." "I have fallen in love with you," Victoria said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I did not mean to. I tried not to. But I have, and I needed you to know in case things go wrong." Reed pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Things are not going to go wrong, but since we are being honest, I have fallen in love with you too. Have been since the moment you stood up to Hackett in the general store with more courage than sense. You are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, Victoria Morrison. And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were right to trust me." Then he was kissing her, and Victoria felt like she was coming home. His lips were gentle but firm, one hand cupping her face while the other remained tangled with hers. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the emotion she had been holding back, all the fear and hope and love that had been building for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "That was," Victoria started, then laughed breathlessly. "That was wonderful." "We can do it again any time you like," Reed said with a grin that made her heart race. "I think we should get to the ranch before Mrs. Garrett begins to worry," Victoria said reluctantly. "But yes, definitely again. Many more times." The Triple Bar Ranch house was a sprawling single-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch and windows glowing with warm light. As Reed pulled the wagon up, the door opened and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha Garrett was in her early 50s, with graying brown hair, a motherly figure and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Victoria's face and immediately ushered her inside. "You poor dear, you look exhausted. Reed, bring her things to the guest room. Victoria, is it? Let me get you some tea and something to eat. You are safe here, I promise you that." The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a real bed, clean linens and curtains at the window. Victoria sank onto the bed and felt some of the tension leave her body. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. There was a tap on the door, and Reed entered carrying her carpetbag. He set it down and sat beside her on the bed. "How are you holding up?" "Better now," Victoria said. "Reed, I cannot thank you enough for everything you are doing." "You do not need to thank me," Reed said. "This is what people do when they love each other. They stand together." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Lawson?" Victoria asked with a small smile. "Not yet," Reed said seriously. "When I propose to you, Victoria Morrison, it will be properly done, with ring and poetry and maybe even flowers if I can manage it. But yes, I am saying that I intend to marry you if you will have me. Once all this trouble with Hackett and your stepfather is resolved, I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were happy tears. "I want that too, more than I can say." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments before Martha knocked and entered with a tray. "Food, tea, and the information that Henry has doubled the night watch. No one is getting onto this property without us knowing about it. Now, Victoria, you eat something and then get some sleep. Things will look better in the morning, I promise." Victoria spent the next 3 days at the Triple Bar Ranch in a strange mixture of tension and contentment. Tension because she was waiting for Hackett to make his move, for news from the federal marshal, for the other shoe to drop. Contentment because she was with Reed, because the Garretts treated her like family, because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Reed taught her to ride properly, not the sedate side-saddle riding she had learned as a girl, but real riding, astride and confident. They rode out over the ranch lands together, and he showed her the cattle operation, introduced her to the other ranch hands, pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the history of the area. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked for hours, learning each other's minds and hearts. Reed told her about his dreams for the future, about maybe having his own small ranch someday, raising horses and a family. Victoria told him about her love of books and learning, about wanting to teach children who might not otherwise have opportunities for education. They talked about what their life together might look like, painting pictures with words of a future that seemed increasingly possible. On the third night, Sheriff Coleman arrived at the ranch with news. "The federal marshal is coming tomorrow," he told them. "Man named Samuel Grant, has a good reputation. He will take your statement, Victoria, and then he will head to Boston to investigate your stepfather. It could take time, but he seemed confident there was enough evidence to build a case." "What about Hackett?" Reed asked. Coleman's expression darkened. I had that talk with him like I said I would. He did not take it well. Made some threats about me exceeding my authority, about having friends in high places. Then today he announced he is throwing a big party at his ranch this Saturday. Invited most of the town, made a point of saying there would be a special announcement. He is going to expose Victoria publicly, Reed said grimly. That would be my guess, Coleman agreed. Which is why I think you should beat him to it, Victoria. Make your own announcement on your own terms. What do you mean? Victoria asked. The church social is tomorrow afternoon, Coleman said. Most of the town will be there. Stand up and tell everyone who you are and why you are here. Control the narrative before Hackett can twist it. Show people that you have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Victoria felt fear grip her, but underneath it was a growing sense of rightness. You are right, she said slowly. I am tired of hiding, and the people of Stillwater deserve to know the truth. I will be right there with you, Reed said, taking her hand. Whatever happens. The church social was held in the large clearing behind the white clapboard church on the edge of town. By the time Victoria and Reed arrived with the Garretts, the space was crowded with people. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by the townswomen. Children ran and played in the afternoon sunshine, and groups of adults stood talking and laughing. When people noticed Victoria, the conversation stuttered and stopped. Word had apparently spread that she had been staying at the Triple Bar Ranch, and speculation was rampant. She could feel the questions in people's stares, the curiosity, and in some cases judgment. Sheriff Coleman had arranged for her to speak from the church steps where everyone could see and hear. As the time approached, Victoria found her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Reed stood beside her, his hand warm and steady in hers, anchoring her. You do not have to do this, he murmured. We can find another way. No, Victoria said. This is the right thing to do. Sheriff Coleman called for everyone's attention, and gradually the crowd quieted and gathered around the church steps. Victoria climbed up a few steps so she could see everyone and be seen, Reed right behind her. Thank you all for gathering, Victoria said, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger. My name is not Victoria Smith. It is Victoria Margaret Morrison. I came to Stillwater 3 weeks ago running from my stepfather, a man named Frederick Whitmore who lives in Boston. I was running because I discovered he had been embezzling from my late mother's estate and from the businesses he managed. When I confronted him, he threatened my life, so I faked my death and fled. She could hear the gasps and murmurs from the crowd, but she pressed on. I lied about my name because I was afraid. Afraid of being found, afraid of being hurt, afraid that I would bring danger to anyone who helped me. But I am tired of being afraid, and I am tired of lying. The truth is, I came to Stillwater hoping to disappear, but instead I found a home. I found friends who showed me kindness without asking for anything in return. I found work that gave me purpose, and I found love. She looked at Reed, who smiled at her. I found a man who saw past my lies and my fear to the person I really am, and who chose to stand by me anyway. Tomorrow, a federal marshal is coming to take my statement so that my stepfather can be held accountable for his crimes. But I wanted you all to hear the truth from me first, before rumors and speculation could spread. I understand if some of you do not want to associate with me anymore. I understand if you feel I deceived you, but I hope you will understand that everything I did to protect myself and to protect the people I care about. There was a long moment of silence when she finished. Then Miss Carter started clapping. Mrs. Henderson joined her, then the Garretts, then Sheriff Coleman. Slowly, more and more people added their applause until it seemed like the whole crowd was showing their support. Mrs. Douglas, one of Victoria's fellow boarders, called out, "You did what you had to do, dear." No shame in that. An elderly farmer added, "Most of us came west running from something. You are not alone in that." More voices joined in, offering support and encouragement. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. She had expected judgment and rejection. Instead, she was receiving acceptance and understanding. Then a voice cut through the supportive murmurs, cold and angry. "How touching! Though I wonder if you all would be so forgiving if you knew the whole story." Cyrus Hackett pushed through the crowd, several of his men flanking him. He looked furious, his face red and his eyes hard. "Did Miss Morrison tell you that she is wanted back in Boston? That her stepfather, a respected businessman, has been searching for her because he is concerned for her welfare? That she stole documents from him when she left?" "I took copies of documents proving his embezzlement," Victoria said clearly. "And I am not wanted for any crime. Sheriff Coleman has verified that." "So you say," Hackett sneered. "But why should we believe you? You have been lying since you got here. For all we know, you are the criminal and this stepfather is the victim." "That is enough, Hackett," Sheriff Coleman said, stepping forward. "Miss Morrison has told the truth and the federal marshal will sort out the rest. You need to back off and let the law handle this." "The law?" Hackett laughed harshly. "The law is whatever men with power say it is, and I have got plenty of power in this town. If you folks want to shelter a liar and a fugitive, that is your business, but do not come crying to me when it all blows up in your faces." He turned to Victoria and his expression was vicious. "You had your chance, Miss Morrison. I offered you a good life. Now you are going to regret crossing me." "Is that a threat, Hackett?" Reed said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Take it however you want, Cowboy," Hackett said. "Just remember that I tried to do this the civilized way." He turned and stalked off, his men following. The crowd was buzzing with conversation, people angry at Hackett's behavior and concerned about what he might do. Henry Garrett raised his voice. "I think we all need to stand together on this. Cyrus Hackett has been throwing his weight around in this county for too long. It is time we showed him that money does not give him the right to threaten people or force them into things they do not want." There were murmurs of agreement. Other prominent townspeople added their voices. The bank president, the minister, several large landowners. Victoria watched in amazement as the community she had tried so hard to hide from now rallied to her defense. That evening, back at the Triple Bar Ranch, Victoria sat on the porch with Reed watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple. "I cannot believe how everyone reacted," she said. "I expected them to turn away from me." "People out here understand about running from the past," Reed said. "And they understand about sticking together when someone is being bullied. Hackett made a mistake today by threatening you in front of everyone. He showed his true colors, and people did not like what they saw. But he is not going to let this go," Victoria said worriedly. "You saw how angry he was." "No, he is not," Reed agreed. "Which is why we need to be careful. The marshal will be here tomorrow, and once you have given your statement, we will have legal protection. Until then, we watch our backs." The marshal arrived the next afternoon, riding in on a sturdy bay horse with a no-nonsense air about him. Samuel Grant was a man in his early 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He spent 3 hours with Victoria, taking down her statement in careful detail, examining the copied documents she had brought, asking pointed questions about Frederick Whitmore's business dealings and her mother's death. "This is good," he said when they were finished. "Very good. You have given me more than enough to start a federal investigation. I will head to Boston immediately and begin looking into Mr. Whitmore's affairs. It may take some time, but I am confident we can build a solid case." "What about Victoria's safety?" Reed asked. "Her stepfather has resources." He could send men after her. "I will make sure Mr. Whitmore knows that Miss Morrison is under federal protection," Grant said, "and that any attempt to harm her will be seen as obstruction of justice and dealt with accordingly. That should make him think twice." "And Hackett?" Sheriff Coleman asked. Grant's expression hardened. "From what you have told me, this Cyrus Hackett is a bully and a blackmailer. If he steps out of line, if he makes any move against Miss Morrison, you let me know immediately. I will come back here and deal with him personally." After Marshal Grant left, Victoria felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It was not over, might not be over for months, but at least the wheels of justice were in motion. Frederick Whitmore would face consequences for his actions. And she was free to build the life she wanted. That evening, Reed asked her to take a walk with him. They strolled away from the ranch house toward a small rise that overlooked the property. The sunset was spectacular, painting the Oklahoma sky in impossible colors. When they reached the top of the rise, Reed stopped and turned to face her. "I know I said I would wait until everything was settled," he began, "but I have been thinking. We do not know what tomorrow will bring. Hackett could cause trouble. Your stepfather could be arrested, or he could try something desperate. Life is uncertain, especially out here, and I do not want to waste another day without making my intentions clear." He dropped to one knee, and Victoria felt her breath catch. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold band. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "It is not fancy, not what a Boston society woman would expect, but it is all I have to offer, along with my heart and my promise that I will love you and stand by you for the rest of my life. Victoria Margaret Morrison, will you marry me?" Victoria was crying again, but these were purely happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Reed Lawson, I will marry you. And this ring is perfect because it comes from love, and that is worth more than all the diamonds in Boston." Reed slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "How soon can we arrange a wedding?" Reed asked. "Because I am not interested in a long engagement," Victoria laughed. "Neither am I. Let us talk to Reverend Thomas tomorrow. Maybe we can have a simple ceremony next week." "Next week sounds perfect," Reed said, kissing her again. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, making plans and dreaming dreams, but their peace was short-lived. As they approached the house, they saw Henry Garrett standing on the porch with a grim expression. "Reed, Victoria, we have got trouble," Henry said. "One of the hands just rode in from the north pasture. Someone cut our fences and scattered about 50 head of cattle. And they left a message, written on the fence post, 'You chose wrong.'" "Hackett," Reed said, his jaw tight with anger. "Has to be," Henry agreed. "This is him making good on his threat." "I am so sorry," Victoria said. "This is because of me." "This is because Cyrus Hackett is a vindictive criminal," Henry corrected firmly. "And we are not going to let him get away with it. Reed, round up the hands. We need to get those cattle back before they wander too far. I am sending someone to fetch Sheriff Coleman. This ends now." The next few hours were chaotic. Reed and the other ranch hands rode out to round up the scattered cattle while Victoria waited at the ranch house with Martha Garrett, trying not to let her worry overwhelm her. When Sheriff Coleman arrived, he was furious. "I have had enough of Hackett thinking he is above the law," Coleman said. "I am going out to his ranch tonight to arrest him for property destruction." "Be careful," Victoria urged. "He has a lot of men working for him." "I will deputize some of the townsmen," Coleman said. "Hackett may have money, but he does not have the law on his side, and he does not have the support of this community." It was nearly midnight when Reed and the other hands returned with the cattle. Reed was exhausted and dirty but unharmed. He found Victoria waiting on the porch and pulled her into his arms. "We got them all back," he said. "And there is more good news. Sheriff Coleman arrested Hackett a few hours ago, caught him drunk and boasting to his men about teaching you a lesson. Hackett is in jail, and his men scattered when they realized the sheriff had half the town backing him up." Victoria sagged against Reed in relief. "Is it really over?" "The trouble with Hackett is over," Reed said. "We will still have to wait for news about your stepfather, but yes, the immediate danger has passed." They were married 6 days later in a simple ceremony at the Stillwater church. Victoria wore a blue dress that Miss Carter had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Reed had picked that morning. The church was packed with townspeople who had come to celebrate the couple who had won their hearts and their respect. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, and when Reed kissed his bride, the entire congregation erupted in applause. At the reception that followed, held in the same clearing where Victoria had confessed her true identity just a week before, people danced and ate and offered toasts to the happy couple. Mrs. Henderson cried and hugged Victoria tight. "I knew from the start you two were meant for each other," she said. "I am so happy for you, dear." Miss Carter gave them a set of books as a wedding present. "For your future home," she said. "Every house needs a good library." Henry and Martha Garrett gave them a piece of land on the edge of the Triple Bar Ranch property. "So you can build your own place when you are ready," Henry said. "You are family now, both of you." As the sun set on their wedding day, Reed and Victoria stood together watching the Oklahoma sky turn pink and gold. "I cannot believe this is my life now," Victoria said softly. "A month ago I was running scared, and now I am married to the man I love in a town that has embraced me. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Reed said, kissing her temple. "You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Lawson, for better or worse, until death do us part." "I would not have it any other way," Victoria said, turning to kiss him properly. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel that Mrs. Henderson had arranged as her gift to them. It was a night of tenderness and passion, of two people learning each other in new ways, of vows made real in the most intimate of settings. And when Victoria fell asleep in Reed's arms, she felt completely safe and completely loved for the first time in years. Over the following months, life in Stillwater settled into a new normal. Cyrus Hackett was tried for property destruction and sentenced to 6 months in jail. While he was locked up, many of his ranch hands quit, and his business operations suffered. Word was that he would sell out and leave Oklahoma when he was released, which suited everyone just fine. More importantly, news came from Boston. Marshal Grant had arrested Frederick Whitmore on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and suspicion of murder in the death of Victoria's mother. The evidence Victoria had provided, combined with what Grant uncovered in his investigation, was overwhelming. Frederick was facing years in prison, and his social standing was utterly destroyed. He would never hurt anyone again. With Frederick's arrest, Victoria's inheritance from her father's estate was restored to her. It was not an enormous fortune, but it was enough to give her and Reed choices. They decided to use part of it to build a small ranch on the land the Garretts had given them, raising horses like Reed had always dreamed. The rest they put toward establishing a school fund for children in the area who could not otherwise afford education, a project that made Victoria's heart sing. They built a modest but comfortable house with large windows that let in the Oklahoma sunshine, and a wide porch perfect for sitting and watching the sunset. Victoria furnished it with care, mixing practical necessities with small touches of beauty. Reed built her bookshelves in the parlor and made sure she had a space that was all her own for reading and studying. Their first year of marriage was full of hard work, laughter, occasional arguments that were quickly resolved, and deep contentment. They learned each other's rhythms, learned to work as a team, learned that love was not just a feeling but a choice they made every single day to put each other first. Victoria continued teaching at the schoolhouse part-time, a role she loved and excelled at. Reed built a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, and people came from far and wide to buy animals he had worked with. Together, they became pillars of the Stillwater community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help anyone in need. On a warm spring day, exactly 1 year and 3 months after Victoria had stepped off that dusty stagecoach, she stood in her kitchen making bread and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She gripped the counter and breathed deeply, waiting for it to pass. When it happened again the next morning and the morning after that, realization dawned. She waited until she was certain before telling Reed. That evening, after supper, she took his hand and led him out to the porch where they so often sat in the evenings. "I have some news," she said, barely able to contain her smile. "We are going to have a baby." Reed's face went through several expressions in quick succession: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. "A baby, truly, truly," Victoria confirmed. "I think probably due in the late fall." Reed let out a whoop of happiness and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down gently. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. Victoria, this is the most wonderful news." "I know," she said, laughing at his excitement. "I have been bursting to tell you for days, but I wanted to be sure." They sat together on the porch swing Reed had built, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, and talked about their hopes for this child. They discussed names and nurseries, and all the ways their life was about to change. And through it all, Victoria felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The baby, a healthy boy with Reed's brown eyes and Victoria's auburn hair, was born on a crisp October morning with Martha Garrett and the local midwife in attendance. They named him Charles Reed Lawson, after Victoria's father and his own. Reed held his son with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny, perfect person they had created. "He is beautiful," Reed whispered, "just like his mother." "He is strong," Victoria said, "like his father." Charles grew into a lively, curious child who kept his parents on their toes. When he was 2 years old, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time they had a daughter they named Grace Margaret. 2 years after that, another son, William Henry, joined the family. Their house was full of noise and laughter and love. On a warm summer evening when Charles was 8, Grace was 6, and William was 4, the family gathered on the porch as they often did. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out in the twilight. Victoria sat on the swing with Reed, watching their family and marveling at how far she had come. "Do you ever think about Boston?" Reed asked. "About the life you left behind?" "Sometimes," Victoria admitted, "but not with regret. Everything that happened, even the terrible parts, led me here. Led me to you and to this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing. Not even the scary parts, not even Hackett's threats," Victoria considered. "Not even those. They taught me that I was stronger than I thought. That I could stand up for myself and fight for what I believed in. And they brought this community together in a way that might not have happened otherwise." She looked at her husband, at the man who had seen past her lies and her fear to the person she really was. "You saved me, Reed. Not just from my stepfather or from Hackett, but from a life half lived. You showed me what it meant to be truly seen and truly loved." Reed kissed her softly. "You saved yourself, Victoria. I just had the honor of being there to witness it, and you saved me right back. Before you came along, I was drifting through life, working hard but not really living. You gave me purpose and passion and a reason to build something lasting. We built it together, Victoria said. This life, this family, this home, together. Charles ran up to the porch, his face flushed with play. Papa, can you tell us the story again, about how you and Mama met? Reed laughed. Again, I told you that story just last week. But it is such a good story, Grace chimed in, climbing up onto the porch. Tell it, Papa. Even young William toddled over, sensing something interesting was happening. Reed looked at Victoria with a smile. What do you think, Mama? Should I tell them? I think you should, Victoria said. Every good love story deserves to be told and retold. So Reed gathered his children around him, and Victoria listened as he recounted their story. The dusty day she stepped off the stagecoach, the way she had stood up to bullies despite her fear, the long road they had traveled to build the life they now shared. He did not mention all the details, the parts that were too complicated or too frightening for young ears, but he captured the essence of it. Two people finding each other against all odds, choosing courage over fear, building something beautiful out of hardship. And then your mama told me her name was Smith, Reed said with a grin. But I could see in her eyes that she was hiding something. Eyes do not lie, you see. They tell stories all their own. What did Mama's eyes say? Charles asked, fascinated. Reed looked at Victoria, and his voice was soft with remembered wonder. They said she was scared but brave. They said she was running from something but hoping for something too. They said she needed a friend, maybe even more than a friend. And they said that if I was patient and kind, she might learn to trust me. And did she? Grace asked. Eventually, Reed said. It took time, but yes, your mama learned to trust me, and I learned to trust her right back. Trust is what love is built on, remember that. Victoria felt her eyes misting with tears. After all these years, Reed could still make her fall in love with him all over again with just a few simple words. She reached out and took his hand, and he squeezed back. Their children gathered around them, their life spread out before them like a promise kept. As the sun set over their Oklahoma ranch, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Victoria Morrison Lawson looked at the family she had built, the home she had made, the man she had married, and felt nothing but profound gratitude. She had come to Stillwater running from death, and found instead a life richer and fuller than she ever could have imagined. She had told the cowboy her name was Smith, but he had seen through the lie to the truth beneath. His eyes had told a story she could not hide from, a story of safety and acceptance, of patience and kindness, of love that was worth fighting for. And together, they had written a new story, one of courage and redemption, of community and belonging, of two broken people becoming whole together. Years passed, and the Lawson family grew and thrived. Charles grew into a fine young man who inherited his father's gift with horses and his mother's sharp intelligence. He eventually took over the horse training business, expanding it beyond even Reed's ambitious dreams. Grace became a teacher like her mother, opening a school that served children from all over the territory. William, the youngest, discovered a talent for music and brought joy to countless gatherings with his fiddle playing. Reed and Victoria watched their children grow with pride and amazement. They faced challenges, of course, as all families do. There were hard winters and drought years that tested their resources. There were illnesses and injuries that frightened them. There were moments of doubt and disagreement. But through it all, they held fast to each other and to the vows they had made on that summer day in the Stillwater church. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Reed took Victoria back to the spot where he had proposed, the rise overlooking their ranch. The land had changed over the years. Where once there had been only prairie grass, now there were fenced pastures full of horses, a barn and outbuildings, and their house nestled in a grove of trees they had planted. In the distance, they could see Charles's house and the small cottage where Grace lived with her new husband. 20 years, Reed said, shaking his head in wonder. Feels like yesterday and like a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean, Victoria said, leaning into his side. I look at that scared young woman who stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago, and she feels like a stranger. I am not her anymore. No, Reed agreed. You are not scared anymore, but you are still brave, still strong, still the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Victoria smiled. And you are still the steady, kind man who saw past my lies and offered me safety, who kept every promise he ever made, who gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. They stood together watching the sun set, as they had done thousands of times over the years, and Victoria felt the same sense of contentment and rightness she had felt on their wedding night. This was her life, the one she had chosen and built with her own hands and with Reed's partnership. It was not perfect, but it was real and it was hers and it was full of love. You remember what you said to me that first day? Victoria asked. When you walked me to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. I said a lot of things, Reed replied with a grin. Which part? You said you hoped I would find what I was looking for here, Victoria said. And I did, Reed. I found everything I was looking for and so much more than I knew to hope for. I found home. I found purpose. I found love. I found myself. All here in Stillwater, all because a cowboy with kind eyes decided a stranger was worth helping. Reed pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Best decision I ever made, he said simply. As the years continued to pass, Reed and Victoria grew old together with grace and gratitude. They became beloved figures in Stillwater, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of true partnership and enduring love. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, their family tree growing branches that spread across Oklahoma and beyond. On a spring morning in their 78th year together, Victoria woke to find Reed already up and sitting on the porch in his favorite chair. She made coffee and joined him, moving a bit slower than she once had but still strong and capable. They sat in companionable silence, sipping their coffee and watching the sun rise over the land they loved. I have been thinking, Reed said after a while, about that first day when I saw you step off the stagecoach. I have spent a lot of years wondering what made me approach you. Why you, out of all the strangers who had passed through Stillwater? And have you figured it out? Victoria asked with a smile. I think so, Reed said. I think some part of me recognized you, even though we had never met. Recognized you as the other half of myself, the part that was missing. And I think you recognized me too, even though you were too scared to admit it then. Victoria reached over and took his weathered hand in hers. I did recognize you, she admitted. Your eyes told me a story I desperately needed to hear. They told me I could be safe, that I could be loved, that I could start over and build something new, and you spent the rest of our life together proving that story true. I love you, Victoria Morrison Lawson, Reed said, as he had said countless times over their decades together. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you always. And I love you, Reed Lawson, Victoria replied, as she had replied countless times. You are the best man I have ever known, and sharing this life with you has been my greatest joy. They sat together as the sun climbed higher in the Oklahoma sky, two old souls who had found each other in youth and walked side by side through all the seasons of life. Their story had begun with a lie and a look, with fear and courage in equal measure. It had been tested by threats and danger, by poverty and hardship. But it had endured, growing stronger with each passing year, rooted in trust and watered with love. In the years that followed, When Victoria had finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 92, Reed would tell their story to anyone who would listen. He would talk about the brave young woman who had arrived in Stillwater with nothing but a carpetbag and secrets, who had stood up to bullies and fought for her freedom, who had given him a life of meaning and purpose and love beyond measure. And he would always say the same thing at the end. She told me her name was Smith, but I looked in her eyes and saw the truth. Saw a woman worth fighting for, worth standing beside, worth building a life with. The eyes never lie. They tell the story the heart is afraid to speak out loud. And her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Reed lived for 3 more years after Victoria's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved him. When he finally joined his beloved wife in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Stillwater, the entire town turned out to say goodbye to a man who had exemplified everything good about the frontier spirit: courage, integrity, loyalty, and love. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed a simple message: Reed Lawson and Victoria Morrison Lawson, 2 souls who found each other in the Wild West, built a life together and loved until the end. And so their story ended where it had begun, in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a small town that had given them shelter and community and belonging. But the legacy they left behind continued for generations. In the children they raised, in the school that bore Victoria's name, in the ranch that Charles and his descendants would run for decades, in the example they set of what true partnership and enduring love could look like. Years later, a young woman visiting Stillwater would stand at their grave and read the inscription, and she would ask the elderly man showing her around about the couple buried there. And he, their great-grandson, would smile and say, "Let me tell you a story about a woman who arrived in town running from her past, and a cowboy who looked in her eyes and saw her future. It is a story about courage and love and second chances. It is the story of how my family began." And he would tell the tale of she told the cowboy her name was Smith. The boy's eyes told a story she couldn't hide, and the love that grew from that fateful meeting would live on in memory and in the hearts of all who heard it. It was a story of the American West, of 2 people finding each other against impossible odds, of love that endured through hardship and danger and time itself. It was a story worth telling and retelling, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single moment of courage and a kind word from a stranger who becomes so much more.